A minute has passed, so let's get started. Good afternoon and welcome to EnergyCareers 2021. This panel today is on entrepreneurship in energy. I am Julie Stremko with the Center for Energy Workforce Development, and I will be moderating today's session. We will be leaving 10 minutes at the end of the session for questions and answers. So please, audience, feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat while the panelists are speaking, just to make sure you don't forget. And then at the end, we will read through those and direct them to the group. During the Q&A, you can also raise your hand if you're more comfortable with that and ask questions. I really do encourage you to use this time to ask any questions that you may have. This is a great opportunity. You've got a veritable brain trust in front of you, so please ask those questions. If you think there's a lack of creativity and entrepreneurship in the energy industry, we encourage you to think again. This session is designed to connect with those who have an entrepreneurial spirit, but don't understand how to connect it with the energy sector. Participants will learn about sharing their own company and/or putting that go-getter, agent of change desire into any position in the energy industry. With that said, I would like to introduce our panelists. I'm actually going to have our panelists do a self-introduction. Sarah, why don't we start with you? I'm just going to go around the room.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Again, Sarah Valdovinos. And I guess I would say, first and foremost, I'm a persistent problem solver. Is how I like to describe myself. I'm a problem solver who helps businesses grow. And I do that by deploying either capital or my skill set. And for the last couple of years, I've been focusing on companies that are delivering climate solutions. So that means investing in distributed solar companies or e-mobility, which we'll talk about in a little bit later. I'm based here in New York, raised mostly in LA. I'm first generation Mexican and first generation to college and grad school in my family. And I'm very, very excited, as I said, to be here with you.
Thank you, Sarah. John.
So yeah, thanks for inviting me to the panel and to everyone for joining. Excited to be here and talk about the need for entrepreneurship in the energy sector, given all of the big, massive goals and achievements that lie ahead of us. I'm with National Grid Partners, which is the corporate venture capital arm and innovation arm for National Grid. National Grid is a UK-based utility, investor-owned utility. We have operations in the UK as a gas and electric transmission utility, and then in the northeastern US as a gas and electric distribution utility. And then we have a competitive energy arm. We're one of the world's largest investor-owned utilities. National Grid Partners was set up about 3.5 years ago to be National Grid's kind of disrupt ourselves business. So we really have a three-part mandate within the company. One is to engage and invest in startups that can either help us improve our current operations or help us look around the corner, look under the tent, whatever you want to call it, in terms of how the industry is evolving. The second thing we do is we sponsor our own internal disruptive innovation projects that are outside of kind of Horizon 3, beyond what our business units might take on themselves. And the last thing we do is help spread that entrepreneurial mindset, that startup pixie dust across the business so that you can take a regulated utility business and really help push people to think about things in a much more lean entrepreneurial way. So all of that comes back to us. And, we now have a portfolio of 30 companies, scores of internal innovation projects. And so I think we're having a real impact, on National Grid and as we navigate the clean energy transition.
Thank you. And Rashid. Rashid, you're on mute.
We'll start that again. Hi, everybody. Rashik Raman here. I'm, I guess, the the official entrepreneur, that we all have kind of entrepreneurial thinking in our blood here. I'm the chief operating officer of a startup company called VEM Controls. We work in the energy management space, and we had an interesting story. We kind of started out, my father, Saifer Rahman, is actually a professor at Virginia Tech, and he created some technology in his lab a few years ago, and funded by the Department of Energy as well as the National Science Foundation. And he was told by DOE at the end of that project that it's something you might look to commercialize. I had had a background in finance in New York for many years, as well as kind of a later on interest in life to work in the clean tech sector. So worked for some other startups as well as worked in research. And I kind of brought that to VM Controls about 3 years ago when we received a grant from the Department of Energy, what's called a Small Business Innovation Research Grant, an SBIR grant. And I've been sort of leading that grant as well as sort of trying to grow the business, building relationships with groups like Sarah's investors, as well as utilities. We happen to work with a utility in Chicago on a number of projects. Anyways, I'm excited to be here, sort of share my entrepreneurial journey and kind of find the sort of areas of commonality between what Sarah and Jonathan do, because I think really all of us working together is sort of how we'll make an impact on the decarbonization goals that we all have. So that's it for me.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. And audience, again, please feel free at any time to put your questions in the chat. You don't have to save them for later. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start this conversation and really open it to the group. I would like to have everybody's input. And the question is, why is there an interest for innovation in the energy industry? And anybody can start, please feel free.
All right, I'll jump in since everyone's being shy.
Yeah.
I think for me, there's three. This is my personal view, and then really there's three key major themes here. If you care anything about climate, right, about two thirds of greenhouse gas emissions globally can be attributed in some way, shape, or form back to energy, power generation, transportation, heating, that sort of thing. So that's kind of item number one. We have a lot to do, and we need all hands on deck to come and help solve some of these problems. I think two, if you really think about what energy represents, it's a lifeblood of the economy. And whether you go back to the Industrial Revolution and you think, well, okay, fine, it wasn't as if electricity was the only innovation, but it certainly was a major catalyst for that transformation that we had in our society. And now that we've been going through the digital revolution, I mean, it is definitely the pulse that keeps that moving forward. And so if we want to continue to address and grow and solve for a lot of the issues in society, energy is key. And the only way we can do that is by having many more Rashiks in the system, in the ecosystem, solving for all of the different problems in what is a very complex system in general. I don't know what Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I mean, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, the net zero and decarbonization challenges that sit before us, as Sarah was mentioning. I mean, that's driving a massive need for innovation and creative thinking in our industry. Something, though, to kind of take a slightly different but related perspective, when we started National Grid Partners 3.5 years ago, a slide we liked to show to our internal, business leaders and executives around the company is a chart of all the industries that have been disrupted. And you can sort of list them all off, hospitality by Airbnb, or, automotive by Tesla, media, insurance, banking, et cetera. And, the energy industry has been kind of insulated from a lot of that. Certainly power utilities have. But the point that we like to make, certainly internally, is that, anywhere there's large profit pools and a lot of money coming, into the, trillion-dollar industries, people are going to figure out eventually how to disrupt your industry. And this whole, clean energy transition, The pathways that we're all looking at to decarbonization is the perfect opportunity for that disruption. So that's why we as a company, why our board, allocated originally $250 million to National Grid Partners to invest in startups and innovation projects, why that's expanded now, is because we're looking at all of these industries that have been disrupted. We're an industry that's going through a period of transition. So if we're not tapping and getting in front of all of that change and getting on top of all of that innovation that can happen, then it's kind of an existential threat to us as a company. So that's why we're motivated to get in front of the innovation that's happening.
Yeah, I think what we saw when we were doing that was sort of an unmet need. So for example, in our market space, we're looking at small and medium commercial buildings that sort of haven't been served by traditional offerings in the space. And I think it's a lot easier because of I think Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz talks about software eating the world. Well, software can also eat energy utilities too. So we're a software company. We can bring some smart guys who work on a specific problem that Sarah was talking about, and we can iterate. We can see things. We can try stuff. We can learn the lessons that can eventually, if we're successful, they become useful products for companies like Jonathan's or for investors who are looking at it. But our goal as entrepreneurs in this space is to sort of learn, push, try, so that we can see where the path is forward in disruption. And so when we kind of started on this journey, we said we have a technology. We know there's a market need. It's a large market. It's a matter of kind of getting our product so that it actually can solve a problem and then sort of bring it into the marketplace.
So we kind of touched on this, but and Jonathan, you said we were going to get to it later, but we should probably get it now. And let's talk about the importance of rethinking the entire energy value chain to meet decarbonization targets. Anybody like to take that one? Sarah?
Jonathan, I saw you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah.
If not, I'm good. I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of ways to take sort of, energy value chain for decarbonization. I guess one way that we're thinking about it and is, there's a lot of opportunity as a power utility to make our existing operations today run better. And why does that matter for decarbonization? Because that enables you, it relieves, the rate payer bill pressure if you're digitizing as much of the company as you can to, make every element of how we operate more efficient. And quite candidly, for power utilities, there's still a big opportunity for project management, for, asset investment planning, for GIS systems, for productively managing thousands of field force workers, whether that's line workers or pipe fitters, that make our company run, to all of the OT cyber that we need to do to make sure our networks are safe and secure. So there's a massive opportunity there for us to help the existing company run better through innovation. What that then does, though, is that then sets us up to invest in all of the technologies that will be necessary for decarbonization, whether that's, the electrification of, mobility, the electrification of heat, deploying hydrogen as a, no carbon fuel source. And so we kind of look at, we talk a lot about the 3Ds, digitization, decentralization, and decarbonization as all being related, whether we're looking at investment targets or innovation projects, because that digitization sets us up to be as efficient as possible for then implementing or adjusting to the decentralization of power gen, moving from central power gen to rooftop solar to wind. And having those two elements are necessary to then being able to really drive, successfully implementing a decarbonization strategy. So let me come up for air and give Sarah and Rashik a chance to comment.
Sarah, would you like to comment?
Well, yeah, I think just to add to what Jonathan's saying, I think what's interesting just in terms of the opportunity for the value chain to be decarbonized as a whole is precisely that it is there's a lot of different problems to solve, and there's a lot of now, right? There are trends that are affecting not just the utilities, as Jonathan pointed out, but affecting kind of society in general. And there's a lot of push from particularly millennials, but also kind of Gen Z, to provide cleaner solutions, whether it's from the consumer products that they're buying off the shelves, or from the branding that companies are coming out, and committing to, decarbonizing their systems. So there's just so much energy around that. Using that the opportunities, there's just opportunities everywhere you turn, all the way around, all the way along. So the way I look at things is, as I'm deploying capital, I'm coming in and providing capital slightly before the company's ready for Jonathan to come in to invest, right? And so knowing that Jonathan has this need and is also out there looking for companies that are ready to provide him solutions gives me an incentive to go out and provide and help companies grow to the point where they'll be ready, right? It's kind of a gestation period. They'll be ready to do that. And in order for that to work, we need a lot more entrepreneurs, right? We need a lot more companies out there that are helping address the different components. And it's really exciting, right? There's just to give a couple of examples of things that I haven't even started to write checks to, as we say, but things that you wouldn't even think about, like workforce development, getting people trained, right? There's augmented reality, virtual reality solutions that are helping all over the energy value chain, and this actually helps to meet the net zero, right? Because you're able to reduce the waste of all of the value chain, right? Help train people faster, get things optimized. So now you don't have to ship people all over to get them trained, right? You're reducing all that CO2 equivalent mileage, right? So it's really such a beautiful opportunity for anyone to come in and pick something that they're excited about and say, well, hang on, I see this, where can I jump in? That the possibilities are almost endless in terms of where the problems are that you can jump in and solve.
Well said.
And I don't know if it makes sense now, it's up to you, but we can give a couple of other examples, maybe Jonathan, insofar as you're able to publicly disclose, examples that might be helpful for the folks joining us to kind of get concrete ideas of what are the startups out there, right? And also, Rashik, you see a lot of other entrepreneurs and founders. It's helpful to know, like, what are you seeing out there that people are working on?
Sure. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you think about that, investing and innovation throughout the value chain to drive decarbonization, the way we look at it is we're sort of sitting as a power utility somewhat downstream in the value chain, which is to say, energy, whether it's to serve our gas utility businesses or our electricity utility businesses, power is generated or gas is sourced upstream from us. And then ultimately we transmit and distribute it to end customers who then consume that energy. But we are looking to grossly sort of overgeneralize the value chain. We're looking at innovation all throughout that value chain, which is to say, we've looked at companies that are deploying, distributed ledger and blockchain technologies to track differentiated commodities through the value chain, so that if we're sourcing gas, are we sourcing the sort of most responsibly produced shale gas as possible? another, or are we correctly accounting for all of the carbon that's generated in any particular energy commodity that we're sourcing? We're also looking downstream, and as a company, in the U.S., in three very progressively regulated markets, Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island, we're doing a lot of work working with our customers to reduce their own energy use. And then, in terms of energy efficiency programs and various demand side management, non-wires, non-pipes, alternative programs, what we're doing at National Grid Partners is finding a lot of startups and technologies that can help those efforts. So we've invested, for instance, in a company that uses AI to look at a building's energy consumption patterns, and without, requiring the building operator to go buy new furnace, boilers, chillers, it can actually help just use the existing equipment a lot more efficiently to reduce energy use. And then, of course, in our own operations, we're looking at, many, whether it's AI for predictive maintenance, or, cybersecurity technologies, or new encryption technologies to keep, our data safe, or it's even just, lower loss valves that someone's innovated to, reduce any leaks that might be occurring in a gas network, better emissions detection technologies. Those are all things we're looking at in our core operations to make us run better and in a lower, carbon intensity way.
That's great. And Sarah, could you give some examples of the types of things that the entrepreneurial type things that you were investing in your company?
Yeah, so
Technologies.
and the energy ones, because I look at climate solutions in general, or decarbonization, but the reality is that probably 3/4 of that, almost the majority, certainly the majority, ends up being energy transition. And so that includes distributed generation, specifically distributed solar and storage. That includes looking at, for example, the electric vehicle software company, right? So a company's not focusing on creating or generating, creating new charging stations or solving for any of that hardware. They're looking at the software that will help, let's say, a Ralph's or any other supermarket that sets up a charging station on their lot, understand, if they could charge much like you would a parking meter, can they provide any kind of points for that? All of that software that would go behind that are the kind of like some of the examples of ideas. And then also looking at kind of more esoteric stuff that is still a little way down the line in terms of development, maybe has a little bit of revenues, but things like blockchain and carbon credits, right? Can you create a platform where you can take these, you can not only can you trade carbon credits, but can you take them no matter where you are, right? Which you kind of can't do right now. So those kinds of things. And I think where when we talked about this, when we were preparing for the panel, one of the topics, and I know we only have a few minutes left, so I do want to leave time for Q&A, but one of the interesting conversations we did have was about the symbiosis between kind of the investors, whether they're corporate, right, and the entrepreneurs. And obviously there's a policy issue here that we don't have time to get into. But I think the more interesting part of that is really around the investors and how important it is to have the entrepreneurs, because the ideas that they're working on, many of them, most of them, really don't depend on policy. Policy is just a fuel, right, to accelerate that. But really, it's about solving these problems that there's a need right out there. So again, I encourage everyone. I think it's really important to have, if we don't have the sheiks of the world kind of taking the risk and blindly going forward, we really we're never going to be able to meet these decarbonization goals.
Yeah, sorry, I appreciate that. I think that's a really great segue because I would like to, Rashik, are you still on the phone? Oh,
I'm here. Can you see me now?
yes,
Okay. I don't
yes,
know.
I
It keeps
lost you.
coming
I
off and
lost
on.
you. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would like to bring that question up that Sarah really just asked because we talked about, and basically from your vantage point as an active entrepreneur, and then
Yep.
we've got Sarah as the investor and Jonathan as the corporate customer investor. How is the work that you do influenced by other roles?
Right. So for us, it's, we kind of have our building process. We call it R&D, right? We have an idea about the market. We build some software. We test it out with customers. We iterate. At a certain point, we think, okay, maybe there's something to take to the market. So then we sort of maybe we meet the Sarahs of the world somehow, maybe through a networking event like this. In the old days, it would be at a conference somewhere, and we would get together and say, look, I've got this idea. I need to take it to the next stage. So one is thinking about the idea that you have and packaging it so it's not just like an idea in a lab, but an idea that can maybe eventually generate revenue. So I then start to think about the business model. So as the business guy, I tell my guys, okay, when we make a decision about what we build in the product, we need to build features that are kind of initially revenue generating, and then the other stuff may eventually add value to the product down the road. Then I would kind of connect with Sarah. Sarah might give me some feedback on, okay, you know what, you can direct this, or I have relationships with people like Jonathan, and so you may kind of look at this business model, or this is your first path to market. Sell this capability to Jonathan and sell a different capability to someone else. But then all of us are facing. I think Sarah was hinting at this, is at the end of the day, even though we are unbridled in the sense of what we can do, we can create any idea as long as there's a market for it. It'll seed. But eventually, we all face the regulatory context of where we are in the world, and if for something to actually see the light of day, particularly if it's being sold as a thing to work on a utility problem, we have to work within that context and be aware of that. And oftentimes, companies like National Grid have that ability, right? So maybe we incubate with Jonathan, and Jonathan helps us figure out, okay, how does this play in a regulated market? So obviously we need all of these partners, both as customers, investors, and I think quite frankly innovators, because as I just illustrated, all three of us add to this innovation. It may start from me because I have that ability, not being tied to the context that Jonathan does or the sort of business requirements that Sarah does, but eventually we make it better. So that's kind of one vision of how the three of us can kind of work together on this process.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, we're in awe of the entrepreneurs out there who have, visions and the intestinal fortitude to go and pursue things. It's really what, quite frankly, when we see pipeline investment opportunities come in, when we work with our portfolio companies, it's just, you have to take your hat off to people who are really pursuing, disruptive new businesses. And so we love working with the entrepreneurial community, with earlier stage investors, with project financing companies who are often necessary to provide sort of the project finance that's part of deploying a new technology. So it's definitely a community that needs to exist. And we look at our role as helping to be the Sherpas, if you will, for, look, utilities can be kind of formidable organizations to navigate through. They're regulated. They, typically, are monopolies in a certain market segment. They're used to working with other behemoth vendors like GE and Schneider and ABB. So our role is to help, be that navigating arm to work with our startups, whether we've invested in them or even if they just have a great product that we think really merits our business units looking at.
So a quick question, and this is for you, Sarah, and then I want to kind of pass it along to you too, Jonathan. But for members of the audience who may have a product, may have the next disruptor, how do they go about finding investors like yourself?
Well, look, I think there's the beauty of, again, in the spirit of being positive, the beauty of what this horrible thing we've all been through is that it's opened up, I think, the platform and the access in a way that is really, I think, quite amazing and productive, right? So whereas before you kind of had to get yourself, and one of the things I always used to recommend to folks is volunteer at conferences, because that's a great way to meet investors. Now I think, yes, you can continue to do that and go to conferences, but you can also use LinkedIn. I was going to say, though, that I think it's important to understand from an earlier investor perspective, understand where the investor preferences are. And I always think, and it's so complex, and there's, everyone has different answers for this, but really I think super kind of back of the envelope rule of thumb is, do you have revenue or you don't? Most of the investors, because if you start getting into seed, Series A, I'm early, I'm growth, everyone has so many different definitions of that. What I find that's more consistent is, do you have revenue or you don't? And so I would even just ask investor that, do you invest in companies pre-revenue? Yes. If you don't invest, then, who does? Anyone who would invest? I have this great, solution for whatever I'm working on. So I would start with that, and then associations, right, whether it's a venture capital association or an industry association is another one. Conferences were mentioned already. Those are two. And then LinkedIn is a third one that I think is amazing. And I will say, network with each other. Everyone who's at this conference, don't underestimate the power of networking with your cohorts, because people will have met someone they can refer you to or give you a tip on. So those are mine.
Yeah, I would add to that. And by the way, there was a question in the chat, like, at what stage do we invest? And initially the answer I typed was seed stage to Series B, which is true. But to Sarah's point, what does that really mean? And like, you have some companies raising super seeds, like of, $5 million or $10 million seed, which when I started in this at GE 20 years ago, that would have been like a big Series A round. So, who knows? But then the second part of my answer in the chat is, we're looking for companies that are at revenue stage. So to Sarah's point, I think getting clarity on that early on makes a lot of sense. We want a company that, we're kind of ready to show to our operating units. And so if it's not actually with the product, maybe it's just getting its first sales. But if you're not there yet, it's probably not the right opportunity for us. The other thing, just super quickly, I'd add on to Sarah's answer, is there are many, local and national incubators in the energy space. And those are really a great place to do a lot of what Sarah was talking about in terms of networking, mentoring, and to really start to build and refine the product and the company's value proposition. So there's, Clean Tech Open, which is a national organization, but has regional cohorts all around the country. There are, in, cities, there's Greentown Labs in Boston. There's, in New York, it's the, blocking it, the Urban Future Labs in Brooklyn. There are, the national labs all have accelerators. There's Elemental Accelerator. EPRI, the research arm for the utility industry, has something called Incubate Energy. So there are a lot of different places to go to start to get mentorship and networking and guidance that, I would encourage everyone to look into.
One thing to maybe add to that, like a path that we've followed is sort of government funding. So we applied to the SBIR programs. If you have a very technical solution, I would say that addresses one of their topic areas, and we've done the Department of Energy one. Obviously, if you have technology that would apply to something like the Department of Defense, they have a huge energy budget, a number of technologies there. You can do that. I could talk offline to people about that experience. You are running a research project, so it's not sort of, it may look like free capital, but it has its own projects. You're running a government contract and a research project at the same time. But it looks well because you're kind of getting through that initial R&D stage without either using your own money or kind of using investors' money. So it's kind of a sort of a non-dilutive approach to do that. And I second Jonathan. I know, like, we've been part of a accelerator here in DC. It's more just like a network of companies, but I pitch every so often what we're doing. We keep in touch. Especially you kind of need I think we talked about this at our thing, like you need a shoulder to cry on sometimes when stuff isn't going. And it's, if you have a group of sort of fellow entrepreneurs, maybe facing similar market conditions, that can be useful, because it's a long journey, and you need a support network, I think, to sort of kind of see through it as well. So that's a way to think about it.
So here's something I'd like to know. So the industry seems ripe for disruptors because many reasons, but decarbonization for sure. So how do young people and career switchers get into the field of energy and innovation and entrepreneurship in energy? Potentially they were in another field. They see that there's all these opportunities out there. What is the best way for them to get into the field?
I can start with that one, Julie. I would say start by thinking about what problem you want to solve, because there's so many of them. So, like, if you have particular expertise from life, from things like I was always interested in the energy efficiency problem. And so when this opportunity came up, and I saw the sort of and I had a background in technology. So even though I wasn't trained as an engineer, I didn't really work in engineering for the first 10 years of my life. I worked in finance, but I learned how to do deals, how to do business development, how to do that. And then when I went and I did my MBA, I focused on energy. So I focused on learning about the big trends, the big issues in energy, and then kind of thought about, like, where do I want to play? And so as I was learning about the energy efficiency field, I started by Google searching, learning, getting into things like mailing lists of trade associations or periodicals that kind of focus on the industries, and you just read up on that. Eventually you kind of have a basic knowledge, and then you start to talk to people on LinkedIn. You get to kind of hear from them. You talk to some maybe more junior people, and you get there, and so you build a level of expertise, and then maybe you apply for a few jobs in that area, and you kind of you start to grow on the. That's for people who are not kind of coming from the traditional pipelines of, I studied engineering, I worked for a utility, and moved on from there.
Thank you.
Maybe a purely selfish answer is, we, National Grid, have, graduate development programs for students coming out of undergrad across all of the different disciplines, whether it's, electrical engineering or, information technology. We have a leadership development program, which is for people graduating with advanced degrees, masters or PhDs, that we're bringing in often into strategy roles, things like that. So those are two areas. But I would go back to that idea of looking at sort of the city/regional level, for events. If you're in the Boston area, go see what Greentown Labs is doing, in terms of virtual events, or, and I haven't checked on this, ramping up in-person events again. And often there are sort of just, open nights on Wednesday where you can kind of come in and network, things like that. Get onto mailing lists, MIT is an amazing, I think it's the MIT Energy Initiative that anybody can join. It's just like, start to immerse yourself in things like that you can read and get up to speed on everything that's happening.
So I think it all brings it back to networking and building that network, whether you're new to the industry or you've been in the industry. So we are almost at our mark, and I would like everybody to answer this question, but why do we need more entrepreneurs in the energy industry? Don, your button's going off. Bing, bing, bing.
Oh, I was going to say, I was going to give a snarky answer, but we need that amazing, creativity and engineering talent and marketing talent not applied to another, social networking company. I mean, the energy industry, I mean, we're really, kind of, not to over dramatize it, but the challenge ahead of us, how people source and consume energy it's the great, challenge of our times. And so, look, I mean, most of the US heats itself right now using a carbon intensive fuel called either natural gas or, propane or heating oil. How you move buildings and homes off of that in, over the next 10 years, maybe 15, 20 years. I mean, that's a massive challenge. And we need people not just coming up with the technologies that make for, maybe it's more efficient electrical heating, maybe it's better ways to produce zero carbon fuels like hydrogen, but then the people have the marketing ability to figure out, and how do you get customers to give up their gas stove and their gas boiler, and finance types to think about how do you actually make all of that happen in a way that doesn't take a massive chunk out of somebody's budget, and strategy people to figure out the business model innovation to get, so we need everybody to solve this.
Sarah?
So I just heard a Jane Goodall quote today that I think answers this. It's, I think it quotes it something like, the most intellectual creatures to ever walk the earth is destroying its only home. And so, and then I thought, well, not only is it destroying its only home, but however, somehow can figure out how to send Captain Kirk to space, for any Star Trek fans out there. William Shatner managed to get up into space, but we can't solve some of these basic problems to reduce the emissions within the energy system. I feel like we can, right? So I think that's my call to arms, right? Let's not disappoint Jane Goodall. And also, focusing energy, intellect, and all our collective here capacities and whatever that is, even art, that encourages people to move into more efficient energy and transition, I think is absolutely not just worth it, but an absolute requirement.
Great. And Rashek, are you still
there? Yeah. Can you? I keep getting cut. And I would kind of echo Jonathan and Sarah, but really, I think this is the right time in terms of the challenge ahead of us. If you think of the next 10 years about what we need to do in order to make a dent and basically keep the problem of climate change from getting a lot worse than it is. The technology is there, and I think it's exciting. When I entered this field, I thought, look, I'm not an engineer. What can I really do? But as Jonathan quite eloquently put it, there's a space for all of us, all of our talents to kind of apply and work on this problem. And I think entrepreneurship, because it's maybe a little less structured than a traditional 9-to-5 job, it gives you that opportunity to work on these problems. So, I would encourage, fellow entrepreneurs or those who kind of have ideas. Maybe you do it as, what does it call it? The Gen Y or the millennial side hustle. Maybe you start as a side hustle and work on it nights and weekends, but eventually, we need your ideas. So it's important to try and bring entrepreneurial thinking, whether it's in a formal entrepreneurial venture or within the organizations where you serve, because it's well needed.
Well said. And with that, I think we're going to close the session. I would like to remind everybody that at the career fair, there's a resource center. And if any of the members of the audience would like to view the bios of our panelists, they are in the resource center. So they're there for you to peruse. And I want to say a special thanks to Sarah, to Jonathan, and Rashid. Thank you so much for participating today. We truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having us.